Are we live? Yo, what up, everybody? It's A.K.A. the Wizard. So, we released a little video, what was it, a couple weeks ago or a month ago, about the upcoming song production series. And, we're gonna do a little preemptive prep class before we get into songwriting and producing and all that fun stuff, because you're gonna be recording almost throughout all those stages at some point. But we got to talk first about some theory behind getting good recordings, right? So today I thought it was I was gonna jump into like some of the technical stuff about getting a clean recording and what's required and why things happen that cause noise and all that kind of stuff. And I was talking to my buddy Mixed Signals, DJ Melodic, shout out, bro. And he was preparing to maybe record this weekend on a vocal, like do a vocal for one of his beats. And he was like, yeah, I just used this like cheap little mic into like the 1/4 inch input on the back of my interface thing. That interface doesn't even connect to like a computer, like a real audio interface with USB, right? So then I was like, just send me a picture of it. And he's got like XLR cables on the back of it possible too, right? And I'm like, bro, why aren't you using those, right? And there's like huge differences between the cheaper. I don't even know if I have one around here I could show you. But balanced signals. We're gonna talk about balanced signals real quick. Before I even start, I didn't have my A.K.A. the Wizard shirt, so today we're wearing Loot City Slums, baby. Shout out. He runs a great little stream reviewing music videos and music on X. I think multiple channels actually, but yeah, shout out, bro. But yeah, we're gonna talk about balanced versus unbalanced signals. So I wonder if I can even bring up here what I'm talking about for a visual representation of this real quick. Just give me a sec here. I'm gonna pull that up actually. I can't pull it out. What the fuck's going on here? There we go. Prepared a few little things. So here we have. Do I even have a balanced one? Yeah. Okay, so I have this here first. You guys can all see that. So this is like a guitar cable right here. It has one little ring on the end of it, right? And that's called an unbalanced signal. So you have on the back here the ground and then like the tip, right? And essentially what that is, and it's the reason why guitarists, some of the newer designs of amps, you don't hear noise in them and stuff. But like I remember back in the day, I'd be like playing my guitar in my parents' attic, and all of a sudden like some radio station or some kind of RF signal would be coming through the amplifier. I could hear something, right? And it's because this essentially right here is acting as an antenna. It's only got like a plus and minus to it, right? So in audio, if we're using these types of cables to connect microphones and things that are low level and we're amplifying them a lot, they're susceptible to noise, especially the longer the cable gets, right? So the other option we have inside of recording is this, where there's two, right? It's called a TRS jack, and what it is, I'm going to draw out what it actually does electrically for you so you can understand why it's not got noise in it compared to that other type of connection, right? And this is equivalent to an XLR cable like these guys, right? There's an XLR right there. It has the three prongs in it, and they're equal to this, this, and this right here, right? So what that actually is, I'm going to draw it out if I can right here. So you have a signal, right? So we'll use a sine wave right here just for simplicity's sake. So you have a signal, right? And then when you're using like an unbalanced, the one tip type connection, you're literally just getting this straight through. And this is susceptible to having noise enter it, just like that, right? And that's actually happening all the time on every cable all the time, especially if you have wires like parallel to like power lines and stuff like that, it gets even worse. Electromagnetic interference, right? And it's a terrible thing in audio recording. So what happens with a TRS connection where it has the two is you're actually getting this on the first one, and then on the second part of it, you have the opposite thing happening like this, right? So there we have that one. And I don't know if you're familiar with this, but phase relationship in audio. So if I played this out of Pro Tools at the same time as this and they were the exact same waveform, you wouldn't hear anything because they're 180 degrees out of phase to each other and they cancel each other out. So that's the whole premise behind the TRS connection like this, right? We have that one there and the inverse of that there and a common ground right here. And what happens inside of the connection when you put a TRS jack in, there's a chip inside of there that will take both of those signals and kind of compare them and then output it'll figure out what the noise is, because what happens is the same noise that enters this guy right here is also going to enter this guy at the same spot too, right? They happen simultaneously on the wire. So then it's figuring out by hearing the noise first, and then it's going to invert that noise and take it away from the final signal and give you the output of that, which is always clean, right? So it's very important that we use these connections when we're recording, the TRS connections, XLRs, right? And so that's basic step number one of getting a clean recording, is just using the right types of cables, right? And then after that point, it's more so the quality of the interface. I don't know if I have one of these with me. But yeah, when I'm using the camera preamp, for example, there's a ton of noise inside of it because it's just probably $25 worth of like electronics in there to make the actual circuit that creates the preamp, right? But when you get into like the $300 and $400 type preamp, even interfaces, they're decent, but they're not that good compared to some of the higher end stuff, right? So I have like a standalone preamp. It's worth about $300, I think. and it's got much higher quality circuitry inside of it, all the way down to the quality of the capacitors used, military grade specking on like the resistors, stuff like that, right? And those tend to be much higher quality for like not having as high noise ratios and stuff. So that's kind of like step two. You got to plug it into something that's quality to actually get a good sound out, right? And then other things like looping. So when you have an audio interface connected to wall power and your computer is also connected to wall power, you can have a ground loop issue with some devices, which is terrible. It just like muddies the signal up. Same way, you can get like digital interference, all kinds of things. So I mean, there's even further protections you can go to where you can unground the signals in a way by using transformers essentially magnetically separate the input from the output of the transformer. So it has to cross like a gap magnetically, right? And so there's a space in there stopping that noise from happening on top of whatever you have before that chain, right? So I mean, all these little things add up to having a clean signal enter the computer when we're going to record a sound. So that's kind of basics number one we want to talk about. I'm just going to go to my notes here and see. Um, we talked about a ton of things. But yeah, mixed signals. He was planning to record on a little mic. I mean, you have to use what's available to you, right? But to know this information, you can then slowly upgrade or enhance the situation to become more clean, right? Just give me a second here. I'm just going over some of this stuff. Yeah, so same. I'm gonna talk about this for a second, just because I saw it. I don't know if everybody's familiar with like an RCA type cable. Where's that one here? This one. These are considered unbalanced analog cables the same way. So you have like a ground right here and then a hot right here, right? Same kind of thing as a tip and a sleeve on any cable. So you have to be careful because when you buy cables like this, they can act as a single mono balance channel into a TRS accepting jack, or you can use that for stereo connections like headphones and things like that, but they're both unbalanced at that point, right? They still have a common ground and one tip for each side type thing, right? So yeah, that compared to this, which is it's called a SPDIF connection. It's an orange connection you'll see on a lot of the back of the interfaces. And what that is essentially a digital version of the same thing. And it can only carry two channels though still. It's limited by the fact that it only has that, right? And so like I was talking to my director Julie about this and I was like, it's kind of similar to like Rogers Cable and how over time through the progression of technology, we've been able to do what's called attaching a carrier signal to a digital signal like this. So like there's an encoder happening and a second waveform much faster happening, and then you can create lanes of bandwidth and actually send multiple things down that same line. And that's how cable essentially works, right? That's a very simplified form of it, but the fact of the matter is that, right? Where you can't have more than one channel on the old analog system designs, but on the newer ones, that's how USB channels work. That's how so much data can get through those couple little wires that are attached, right? I think there's only five literal wires inside of a USB. One's for power, one's like a copy. There's two other things, and then there's like two data streams really only. But it's capable of sending thousands of things, right? So yeah, we got to be very careful of this, especially with keyboards. If you're going to plug in a keyboard, a lot of the outputs on the back, the quarter-inch outputs, are unbalanced. So a way to get past that is I have here. This one's for a guitar, but I have a DI box here, right? And so an unbalanced signal can go into the input of this, and then it comes out as an XLR, right? And this has got a transformer in it that's essentially doing what I said, right? It can help get rid of that noise that's inherent inside of unbalanced signals. So it's almost every time you're on stage, you pretty much use a DI box with a keyboard that's analog like that. It's just the way it has to go, right? Some of the other boxes like MPCs and things, I don't have it with me right now, but those kind of connections on the back of an MPC are already balanced. So like when you have a stereo output, there's actually like the balance cable there with two tips and then another one for the second channel, right? So they're both going in balanced. And it's a difference between like a line level signal and like a small signal, like a microphone type thing, right? And you just got to be knowing all this little tidbits of information to know how to connect your stuff properly to maintain this high quality sound when you go to record, okay? What were we gonna say also about that? I think I covered all of that stuff. Yeah, then after that point, it kind of comes down to the microphones you select and the gear that you have, right? So you got different levels of preamps, you got different levels of microphones. They all have noise specs on them. So like inside of the best way I can describe it is I have an H4n, those little portable cam or handy recorder things for audio, right? And when you record through that, the preamps are just noisy, right? So the one that I'm using here today is like a professional version of that same thing they use in like the film industry, and that's what the mic's going into here. And just plugging that device in compared to the other device, the noise floor is like 100 times lower than it. Just from the same thing, the quality of the components that make it, but you're going to pay more for that, right? So it's kind of like balancing between affordability of what you're capable of buying at the time and what you need to get as your output sound, right? But in the professional realm, there's pretty much a standard of you don't want any noise. Like it's got to be just the vocal going in there and a lack of noise, if that's the key, right? And then after that point, you have like the studio acoustics of the room, which is really it's not electrical in any way, but it's more physics based. And we're talking about like signal to noise ratio. So like when you have echoes and things in your recordings, say I do a vocal mic recording and you can hear a lot of the room inside of it, right? The reason why that's happening is actually like the sound's bouncing off of the walls and things and back into the mic and causing some of this phase issue stuff. It's not 180 degrees out of phase, it might be 15 for a certain frequency, right? And it's just changing the tone and color to things. So the best recording rooms, they don't have what's called standing waves, which means like waves come into each other and crash and stop almost and create like dips and enhancements to certain frequencies along the frequency spectrum, right? So like the whole point of treatment is to try and neutralize all of that stuff so you're only getting the real raw vocal sound and none of that other stuff coming back into the mic, right? And I mean, a little bit of it's good inside of vocal recordings because we often add, say, we use like an SM7 or something like that. It's really dry up close and you want to have some space in there still, right? So it's rejecting a lot of that room sound. But then in a final mix at the end, you still need to have some of that like air and room in that sound. So we often add like room reverbs. So in the design of studios, oftentimes they have targets for vocals or drums and they're different, right? So like drum rooms will have like longer decay times than like a vocal mic kind of thing. And there's just a little bit of that room in there, but it's tuned to sound good with the way that vocals are or drums or whatever, right? So that's another consideration for just the overall quality of how you're getting vocals in. So that I mean, pop filters, things like that. That's another way that we just get the signal to hit the capsule of the mic itself cleaner. But then it needs to have that path all the way into the computer be exactly clean too, right? With all the right connections, all the right preamps, all that stuff, right? Julia, what was the other point about that? That's what I mean. um, I had some other things here I was talking about too. Before, where is that? I was gonna show you guys. I have this picture right here. So we have another version of a cable right here, and this is a way to get a mic signal that's balanced into a different type of jack, right? So you have like a TRS input. I used this at last night actually for a monitor for a live gig that I did. So it could output the sound off of a quarter inch and go into an XLR and everything's still balanced. It's still a mono signal, just one channel, right? But it's using this design to actually get the sound in there cleanly. Another thing I have here is this. So this is how cables are built right here. This is actually a Belden cable, I believe. And you'll see inside that there's like the multiple cores and everything have shielding built into them and stuff. So like as you go up in cost of the actual like cabling and stuff, you're gonna see that you get less noise inherently just in those cables because of the way they're designed on the inside. So you have your like this one's four, but imagine just three of them, right? That's a typical XLR cable. And then they go to twisted pairs of things. They're still only using three. Like you'll have like those two going to one of the tips, that those two going to another tip, and then a ground back here for that third reference point, right? But then you have shielding around here braided. Sometimes they're using foil, which is even higher end, right? And it's all for rejecting frequencies that might be trying to attack the cable. Because in our realm of like the earth here, we have stuff, millions of different like RF frequencies and things just traveling around us at all times, right? Wi-Fi signals, electromagnetic interference from monitors, cell phones, all kinds of stuff, right? Radio signals, they're all different frequencies from like I'm thinking like even old school if you have one of those old school wireless telephones in your house still, like landlines but wireless and they were on like 900 megahertz, right? And then we get even processors and computers have tiny bits of electromagnetic interference that come off of them, right? So all of this stuff affects the quality of an audio signal. So I mean, even if you sometimes if you're putting a phone up to a microphone too close, like you know how you read lyrics off of it while you're doing a recording, right? If you have it too close, you can cause interference with the sound of the quality of the actual vocal getting recorded too. Just all the little things that you need to be aware of when you go to make these recordings because in the next part of the series, we're going to get into the idea phase, right? So it's going to be more so like songwriting and stuff like that, but you still want to oftentimes test out melodies via recording things, right? Maybe toss a guitar part in there to start with, depending on whether you do vocals or instrumental stuff first, right? So then making sure that you have all these things intact and working properly before you even start to do the songwriting process, right? And I mean, once we get to recording the final things, the actual stuff that's going to be released on the record after it's mixed, I mean, these same principles apply to that. So it's just better to know that right off the top, kind of thing, so that you have it all in place and you don't have to think about it. And I get vocals all the time that are just random, right? So then it comes down to even on the tips of XLR cables on the. It's going to show you. Hold on a sec. I'm just going to grab one. Here we go. Let me get this back in here. So I have another mic here, Audio Technica 4040, AT 4040, right? And the design of this at the bottom actually matters. So on really cheap microphones, you have a problem sometimes with this being loose in the actual circle of like where the XLR cable plugs in. And you can actually hear it wiggle and stuff if it's not good enough, you know? Because it's losing connection to one of the three pins just a little bit, and that can create noise just in itself, right? Especially if you're holding a mic, like vocal mics and things like that, or if you have like one of those cheaper condenser mics that don't have any of the higher ones that I have here, they all have a really nice casing around the actual connection to it, right? And that just helps enhance the ability of it to not jiggle around and make noise while it's actually doing its job, right? But yeah, we're gonna get into all kinds of things moving forward with like once we get into doing the recording process of that, then we'll talk about different mics and why we're using them for different things. Right now, I'm using a large diaphragm condenser mic, right? And it's capable of picking up a broader, I call it like broadband, which is like more data total for the actual signal, right? And the mic's internal design circuitry will dictate how much of that can actually be captured too, not just the capsule itself. So like the best mics like Neumann's, things like these where they're made for modeling, they have to keep it very tight between what's being picked up by the capsule and turned into an electrical signal and what's actually coming out the mic as a signal, right? So it's like this whole process of and I get it, man. Like I started with a $20 Radio Shack mic into the computer with no preamp, right? It had a ton of noise. It didn't have any great tone to it, right? So like the better stuff that you're using over time, the better your sound's gonna be. And it's just one of those things where you just got to slowly work your way up, right? But yeah, what else was I going to say about that? Yeah, I think I said the part about antennas, right? Where the other ones essentially, oh, it's funny because back in the day we had like no cable on our TV, just like humble little household, right? And my dad was an electronic technologist at the time, so he created an antenna just with a wire. And the way that I was explaining this to my brother, actually, I used to make cell phones at BlackBerry back in the day, about 15 years ago. And inside the phone, the antenna is actually routed around the back panel inside of there, and they're all specific lengths for whatever frequency that they're transmitting at, right? So then he tuned the TV so that he could get certain channels or whatever by like just clipping off bits of the wire until you get a good signal. That's how that works, right? Because the wavelengths being transmitted and stuff, it's the same way this all works with noise and everything, where it's like very specific to the cable's diameters and lengths and things and what they're going to pick up if they're going to get noise, right? So it's just if you're using unbalanced cables, like for guitars, you have to try and use a 10-foot one instead of a 25-foot one if you can, right? Because now you're halving the amount of frequencies that are available to be picked up as noise, right? Just little things like that that you need to be aware of as you do this. But yeah, I actually built the amplifiers that I hear in the studio here, and it comes down to the quality of all of the components in your system for getting like high quality industry grade sound, okay? So like I got this design of amp build off a guy who makes amplifiers for a living, and then we modified it with him because I wanted more power out of my amp, obviously, you know. But yeah, so I ended up switching out all of the capacitors, the higher end ones. I ended up switching all the resistors out of the design circuits, upping the voltage of everything, right? And it ends up that you have to like you're gonna get a $3,000 amp sound out of a $300 amp sound just by making all that stuff higher end. So even preamps, microphones have that same feature to them, right? All the higher end stuff has those high end components in them. And it's physics, guys. It's literally how well these devices can do their job accurately, right? Same way as us when we perform music. It's how well can we sing the song to perform it, right? And all this stuff matters when we go to record. Because the best records that you hear on the radio and stuff, or all the like the hits, they're all done this way, where they've already gone past that point of like the beginner type stuff, and all the guys working on that stuff understand all of this deep engineering kind of stuff, right? So it's literally to the point where it's almost locked down in a way where they only use certain things ever. If they have to plug something new in, they're gonna test it first before the, you know what I mean? So, and it came down to that because old school consoles and things like that were designed different ways, just like that, right? Where they had different quality components. They were trying to hit price points with like the retail costs of these things, right? So a lot of times manufacturers will just cheapen up resistors and things like that to try and make the product cheaper, right? Or try and increase their profits, depending on how you look at it, right? But yeah, you have to be that's what I was going to say about the cabling situation is you have to be very careful with these kind of things, right? So they make many different adapters. This is just a headphone adapter right here, right? But then you have to be careful that if you're running an unbalanced signal in or a balanced signal, that you maintain the same type of signal as you use adapters if you're going to have to do that. So just knowing that, and the funny part is you're not going to create, you can't plug a mono jack into this and create a balanced signal, okay? Because it's just not made that way. It's literally only going to use the two then, right? It's just maintaining that entire system all the way from like the raw getting the sound all the way into the computer that's going to get you that high quality and no noise, right? What else was I going to say? Sorry, we're going off the top today. It's just how it is. We didn't have an interview today, so we thought we'd just get into this a little bit for us, you know? Because I promised we were going to do it, and we just have to do it. They're going to come on probably. Well, I got a bunch of interviews coming up, so probably we'll see. Maybe in a month or so will be the next one. 3 weeks. But yeah, we're gonna get into all the aspects of this. I write songs here and there, like the one I performed last night. Shout out to my gig, you know? Yeah, the song dropped yesterday for Valentine's Day, actually. I'm going to just shamelessly plug it since we're here today. I wrote a song and I collaborated with two guys in the UK, Big Alf, shout out, and Alex Darton. They're a producer duo that lives in the UK. They hit me up. They heard one of my other songs that were released and they were like, yo, man, you'd be perfect for our country song. And they just had made a country beat as like a couple beat makers, right? So we ended up collabing. I wrote the song for my wife for our 15th anniversary, and I got to perform it for her on stage last night before she had ever heard it. So that's out on Spotify actually now if you want to go hear that. Well, out on all DSPs. Out on all, yeah, DS. Right. So it was partly just making sure I actually tried to release this song in the UK two times on DistroKid and they failed me essentially, right? So just if you're ever wanting to do something like that, maybe not choose them. But yeah, so like we tried to release that and it failed and then something wrong with the audio file, but it wasn't really the audio file. It was them not doing the metadata right, so it wouldn't show up in North America but over there. And so I had them take it back, or I took it back off, and then I did it again, and then they just kept messing it up. So I just waited until the official drop date and just released the whole thing everywhere, right? Maybe one day we'll be able to do like a territorial release and actually have it happen properly. But yeah, that's available to go listen to right now if you want to hear it. It's a great song. But what else can I say about this? It's a short one today, guys. But this stuff is vitally important when we go to record because we're not even going to get good sound off the top if we don't have these things figured out, right? So, for example, if you buy like a cheaper USB mic, you know the ones that this is just a mic, right? You have to plug it into a preamp to make it work. All these kind of mics, right? But then there's other mics that have the built-in preamp and everything, and it has like a USB output to the computer directly, right? And you have to imagine that they're going through the same process for their product when they go to retail it that all these other companies are, right? So how much are they really sticking in there quality wise for the components that make up the digital analog converter inside of there, stuff like that, right? So that's why we have analog interfaces and digital interfaces that cost thousands of dollars down to like your $100 Scarlett or whatever, right? And it's not only just the size of it and features, but it's the quality of the analog chips, the digital converting chips inside of that make up the sound quality that's entering your computer, right? And it's always been this way for like you'd go to the high end studios and you're going to have a higher end interface in the wall because they've invested hundreds of thousands into their place, right? And those are going to work better than your little tiny interface for the quality of the way they work, right? Same thing with that $300 interface that I have where it's $300 doing that one thing when $1,000 got me eight of those same things, right? So it's not equal when it comes to the amount of money that it costs to make one channel, right? And it really doesn't affect the quality so much, one especially for preamps on mics. Say I put a mic into my 8 channel interface over here, right? It's going to be a certain quality when it comes out. But if I put that other preamp in the way and level match everything so that it goes into a channel as a line signal, that preamp channel inside the 8 channel interface is not going to be doing much to that signal. You're mostly getting the sound of everything from that first stage that you've put it into, right? And it's the difference between not just the circuitry, but like a line level signal compared to like a mic level signal, right? How is the circuitry actually boosting that signal and what's in between there inside that little box, right? Everything matters when it comes down to recording this audio stuff, man. It's wild. So I'm just thinking about the other side. I had a little thing of notes actually before. Where'd it go? One thing I can speak on actually, there's just right off the top of my head that I just thought of was like, okay, so the interface that I run right now is a Firewire interface, Firewire 400, right? And I was having issues where like you could hear digital noise coming out from the computer to the monitors, even though everything's balanced and proper, right? And it's just the fact that the cable that I was using was interfering with something under the desk, and it was just a cheaper cable that wasn't shielded like that one that I showed you, right? It wasn't as good, anyways, right? Because there's many different qualities. If you're just going to like a Best Buy or like an electronics store to get stuff, you got to be very careful what you're buying because they all look the same, right? Or essentially look the same. But the actual way the cores of those wires are made are totally different. So like companies like Belden and Carroll Cable, like those higher end Megami's. There's a few other ones too. I used to work in the wire industry, so we only worked with high end stuff, right? But when you get into like these Chinese cables and random things, even XLR cables can have issues if they're not designed and built right physically, right? So just even the quality, you remember that, Julia? We get certain wire that wasn't of quality and like you couldn't strip the ends of the wire properly. The insulation on them just was not the same makeup or whatever, right? Yeah, different types of plastics and things that they're using inside of there that they probably shouldn't be, you know? Yeah, I can probably show you. Maybe not. If you look at any XLR cable, there's usually some stuff written on it by the manufacturer of the actual cable. And like this one, for example, it says RHC low noise balanced microphone cable, right? Made in the USA, which is a good sign usually. You know, made in the USA is usually a good thing. Made in Germany is usually a great thing. Just certain locales have better quality for their products that they design and make, right? So just making sure that when you buy stuff, you buy the highest quality that you can for the money that you can afford, right? Yeah, it does actually, eh? Sorry, I'm just talking to my director in my headphones here. Yeah, right. They're actually the codes that you'll find on some of these cables here. They actually define what the cable is made out of when it's a higher quality one, right? So, I mean, I can't think of them off the top of my head, but they have different ratings depending on what the type of electricity that you're using it through, right? So like say we're using power cables for like a big machine or something like that, right? They have a different rating than an Ethernet cable for sending tiny little signals, right? Everything's got to be higher end when it's dealing with like higher voltages. Then when we get into audio cables, same kind of thing applies. What is the gauge of the wires inside of there that are actually doing things, right? The quality of the actual makeup of the cable itself, and it's all defined right out on the best ones anyways. It's all defined right out on the insulation that you can read, and everything means something on there, so it'll tell you all about that cable right on the actual wire itself if you look closely. Getting into like tips, you'll see here, I can actually show you one. This is made by Sennheiser right here, and it's a really decent tip, right? But it's not the same as a nitric tip, which is do I have one here I can show you? Hold on one sec here. Here we go. So this is a classic tip. It's called a nitric tip. It's the best one in the entire audio industry right there. Okay? It says nitric. It's Neutrik. And they're known for being the best quality of tips for cables, right? The way that the strain relief works. So this gets more into like the physics of, remember what I said about the microphone on the back end needing that nice collar on it, right? To make sure that it stays tight. Same thing applies to a cable right here on the back end of it. Where this little, maybe I can take it off to show you. We'll take it apart for you right on the set here. So if you unscrew this, you'll see inside of here, it has like a clamp right there, right? And the quality of that plastic and the way that that design is made is specific to the nitric tip on this one, right? But there's many different ways that they go about doing that. So what happens over time if you have a cheaper cable, this doesn't hold in there, right? It's actually putting stress on the wire solder tips that are in there holding everything together, and you can get noise happening in between there when things get loose, right? So that's why these cables are known to be the best ones, is they have like the best quality of like what do they call it again? Like strain relief, essentially, right? And it's just they figured this out down to like the nth degree on how to stop things from falling apart. Essentially, you could beat somebody with this cable and it would still be together and work perfect at the end. You know, compared to I've had other ones. I wonder the put up mic actually. Hold on. This put up mic right here is probably my best example we can have today. This is the one that we put in the set every week on the interview show. And so you'll see right here, we have an XLR coming out of the actual mic, right? Which would be inherently balanced, but then look what happens on the other end. That's an unbalanced output, right? I don't know if you can see that or not. There you go. So you have XLR coming out the mic, but then it's converted. So all they do in this situation, they cut one of the wires off and render it useless, essentially, right? And this is inherently going to have problems because it doesn't have a way of doing that thing that I showed you with the flipping of the inversion of the frequencies and all that. And it's not really canceling anything out. So you got to be very careful. That's a really cheap mic. We just use it as a prop, right? But I've seen mics from stores that are like that, where they just have the cable built into them, and that whole thing can happen for that too, right? So you got to be very careful just buying the right gear and stuff for the cables and everything you're planning to use, right? Yeah, I think one of the coolest things about a TRS cable, the one with the two tips, is that it can become a stereo cable too. So I actually use, when I do balance signals from like an MPC into a computer or something, I'm using the same cable as when I output headphones to my headphone amp. And when it's outputting to the headphone amp, it's actually two channels, one for each ear, right? And on the balance connection, it's just a single mono one using both of those with the inversion technique, right? The phase cancellation thing. Now, I was going to talk about converters actually today too, which is the chips inside of every interface that turn the analog signal into digital, right? So the way that computers store things is always like a square wave. It's so funny. We took a little course on like hard drives in college, and they showed you the different patterns that like things are stored on hard drives with, right? And it's always some kind of a square wave because when you, I'll just draw it on the screen here. We have the screen share up here, yeah? Just create a new one here real quick. Shout out to Microsoft Paint too, by the way. Love it. Yeah, so things are stored like this on a hard drive. And I'll show you this. So like that one will be longer, the box will be bigger, right? And essentially what it's doing is you have zeros and ones, because everything in digital is zeros and ones, right? And then you have a length of like the on signal and the length of the off signal, a longer length of an on signal, and now we can program things using this, right? Makes sense? So then when we go to convert, we have a sine wave. All the analog signals are more like this, just different sizes, right? And we want it to become this up here. So how does that work? In order for that to happen, we have to have something happen here, kind of like this. We have to have something happen here, kind of like this, right? And so on, as you go down a waveform, right? And so how does this actually happen? That's your AD converter causing that effect. And so there's I think about 11 different components in a line that create that filter and everything. And then you get into the quality of what's making that filter, right? So that's what determines your high-end Cirrus Logic chips that they're using inside of like the $3,000, like a Focusrite Red interface, or like a Slate VRS, or an Antelope Audio, those kind of levels, right? Compared to like your cheaper Scarlett Focusrites, the one, even the one that I have, is an older Green Series type preamp system, right? And it's almost the same thing as that newer stuff, a little bit higher end, but it's not to that level of the component quality that's making the best filters in the industry, right? So all your Pro Tools HDX systems and the new native cards and all that kind of stuff, they have the highest end chips for doing that actual filtering that you see right here. And the whole point is you want to get audio data that's exactly the same as what was put in, right? And I don't know if you can ever make it exactly perfect because you're turning it into this, right? And so it's like the closest you can possibly get to the original waveform right here, right? It's just the way that it goes with turning something digital. There's always going to be a slight bit of error where like rounding numbers happen on the end of digits, stuff like that, right? So it's very important that we understand all this stuff because you think about this, right? You're storing this, the bottom sine wave here, on a hard drive like this as a square, right? And so two things are happening. When we want to hear it back, the computer has to take these and turn them back into here, right? Through that same means, but exactly opposite of when we go from analog to digital, right? Just something to be aware of when you go to record, because now your gear matters for the output stages, right? So then when you hear sound back, usually they're using the same chips, like the input chips and the output chips on the same interface will be like the same type. So it's not going to be like you're recording at a higher quality than you're hearing it back. But the overall system is going to determine the quality of both of those things simultaneously, right? Is there anything else to go on about that? That might be it for today, actually. That was a lot to digest. You're probably going to have to go back and watch it again to get some of the specific details about all this, right? But I was going to talk real quick. I have one more picture here. I showed you this one earlier. Where is it here? Why won't it come up? There we go. This guy, the digital cable, right? And so we have this, and then you have another one. It's not common on interfaces today, but you've probably seen them on the back of TVs, and it's called a light pipe, right? And it's actually using a fiber optic cable with light going through it. And the difference between these two things, they're both digital. This one can only handle like a single signal. So like I have an old school like professional burner on my desk here. It's like a $2,000 HHB. When in its day, it was worth that. But it has like input and output on there, right? And it can only handle that one stream of audio going in, one stream of audio going out. It doesn't have the ability to put like 4 or 5 channels of audio into that, right? Whereas this guy on the left here, it has the ability to carry multiple things because of that same idea where they're using, remember what I said about the RF signals in like digital Rogers cable, right? And it has the ability to take and make little bandwidth lanes, I call them, right? I'll try and show you what's happening here with it. Where'd that go, man? There we go. Let's get another one here. So when you have a single signal, you just have that, right? It's going in, it's flowing that way over time, right? So what happens is we're gonna use a digital device. Here's the original signal with a carrier signal, like this, okay? And it's moving much faster, right? Just draw it out here. And we're gonna actually try and the digital devices marry these two things together. So now they're one stream of audio data, right? But it also has like a bandwidth to this too. So these might go from, I'm just giving a random number here, like 1.4 gigahertz, right? All the way to 1.6 gigahertz, say 200 megahertz worth of space, right? And then you can have another one from 1.7 to 1.9 with a little gap in between just so they don't try and crosstalk, right? So another channel can handle doing 1.7 to 1.9, right? Gigahertz. And so you can see now we've created like this lane of 200 megahertz for one channel of audio to go through. And then you can have another channel down the same wire at the same time, moving at a higher speed. So like when you go to here, you'd have to have a frequency even tinier, like this, right? I can't draw worth a damn, but imagine that's a sine wave. There you go. So like that. That would be your 1.7 to 1.9 lane. And then you go 2.1 to 2.3, right? And that one's going to be even more, right? Like tons compared, right? Like that. So this is how they're actually using digital electronics to create channels within one cable, right? And they're able to go, there's different systems, right? So like the high-end satellite system type things, they'll be able to do like 200 gigahertz worth of bandwidth, right? and have many, many, many channels. So it's all in data flow, and it's all moving at the same speed, technically, at down like the speed of electricity, right? But it has this carrier signal attached to it that can be kind of like decoded at the other end and separated out so that you have all your different channels of audio on one kind of wire. And then you can go to duplex systems where there's two of the wires doing the same thing and four. And that's what Ethernet cables ended up being with your different categories. So if you, I don't have pictures of them with me today because I didn't think of it until now, but when you had Ethernet in the beginning, it was like a Cat 1 cable. You probably heard of Cat 5e cable, right? Which is like your standard blue Ethernet cable that you use to connect the internet, right? And they've been doing this over time, adding more and more wires into the actual physical build of the cable itself, and also the ability of the wires to carry higher and higher frequencies as we've gone up in the generations, right? So I think we're at category 8 right now, if I'm not mistaken, is out to the public. And they're doing things like single shielding pairs of wires inside of there, separating them with like a hexagonal core type thing, right? And I mean, it's gotten really ridiculous on the different designs that you can do, but we're also able to hold way more data that we used to be able to, right? And it's the whole idea of we've kind of hit the limit with like CPUs where silicon can only do a certain amount of speed, right? It'll just burn up if you try and go faster than that. That's what we have with CPUs, right? And it's like until we can figure out how to store light or some other form of energy in some kind of like mathematical way on a hard drive that I imagine like what was it? 2014, so 12 years ago, right? I'm in like engineering class and the teacher's talking about like a light cube. I've never seen one to this day still, but it'd be some kind of like 3D cube that would have almost unlimited storage inside of it if it could store light in some way that was actually categorically proper to like maintain data, right? So like when we're dealing with analog signals to digital like this on cables, there's a certain limitation to how fast things can move before you start getting noise again, right? If you go too slow, now you're not getting the sound. You know what I mean? Like it's the same idea as sample rates inside of digital audio where you have to capture it at double the speed, right? So I don't know if you know what the Nyquist theorem is. Just write it out here. Nyquist. This is a didn't even get big. I don't even know, man. Here we go. Boom. 40. Let's go 40. 48. There we go. Nyquist theorem, which states that in order to capture a signal that say, well, this is the reason why we use 44,100 hertz for like the beginning of the audio spectrum, right? And it's our human ears hear up to potentially 20 kilohertz, right? So we need to be able to capture it. So the Nyquist theorem is, I don't know, it'd be like, I'm not even going to worry about the mathematical formula right now, but essentially you need to be able to move at the sampler rate needs to be able to move at double the speed of the audio signal being captured, right? So in order to get the full frequency response of that. So the same thing inside of cables when it's dealing with data transferring, going from analog to digital like this, right? And it's got to have, if it goes too slow, you're not going to be able to pick up all of this wave, right? Imagine you had a waveform. Where are we here? Imagine you had a waveform. Man, I can't even make it work today. There we go. This size right here, and the carrier signal went like this. Right? You may miss some of that data that's happening inside of there because it needs to be moving at least double that. Like this kind of thing, right? It has to move faster than the actual signal that's happening in order to capture it at the same rate. And that's why we have we go up to what 192 kilohertz, 384 kilohertz devices now, right? And it's like at what limit do you, because we can't hear past that, right? But there's always been this debate in audio engineering of do the frequencies that we can't hear above the human hearing range affect the ones that we can on harmonic levels, right? So if you have information in an audio file that's way higher than human hearing, can it affect and alias that stuff that we can hear, right? And the answer is usually yes. But you have to understand the faster you go in rates when it comes to that. I'll show you here if I can. Here's my audio interface settings, right? So you have your buffer and everything, right? This is speed that can. This is essentially how fast, how many packets, or the size of the packet of data that's going into the computer at a time. So like when you record audio, the audio interface is, I'm gonna get another one here. So it's like, imagine you have music, right? Here's your music. Boom. There we go. You got your center line. There it is. You have to, when an audio interface records, it's going like this. It's taking packets of information, right? Just like this. Well, it's going to be bigger for that one, right? It's going like this to capture everything. You have to imagine this is your sample rate and your actual buffer going into the computer, right? So when I set it to 1024 samples, it's doing 1024, right? In each box, and then sending that off to the CPU over here, right? So then what happens? I'll do it in red right here. And this will cause a lot of issues for people with like choppy audio, errors in their audio, clicks, pops, hums, buzzes, all kinds of things. When I set the buffer rate, sample buffer rate down to, let's see what we have here. I can go down to 32 samples, but my CPU can't handle it because what's happening, I'm going to do it in red. Here we go. So if I did 32, what's capturing is this. More like this, right? Oh my God, I can't even do it. Boxes like this size, right? And then each one's getting sent off to the CPU, right? Just like that. In the same amount of time that you used to do it. So say this is 1.5 seconds long this way, right? 1.5 seconds. You have to imagine the stress on a CPU at this red buffer rate compared to the black one. It's going to have a lot easier of a time processing 1024 sample packets than it's going to when it's getting shot at every 32 samples all the way down that same second and a half worth of time, right? So that's where you get into issues where when you're going too fast for the CPU to handle, and it's getting better because of some of the like the new M4 Ultra chips, stuff like that, and Max, and like we're up to 15 or 16 series on Intel processors, right? And they're capable of going much faster, their frequencies and stuff. So they're able to handle smaller packets at a time easier, right? But for most people that are running like consumer gear, like computers, and even mid-grade type CPUs and things like that, the computer has a much better time doing the bigger packets, right? So you have a limitation. My system right here, I can go down to about 128 before I start hearing issues. And it's a matter that matters the most for recording. So when you're recording an audio signal, this is where latency comes in. So when you're at 1024 samples, it's going to take more time for the computer to process this guy, right? Because it's bigger than this guy, right? So less latency when you're on the red small size signal, like 32 samples and like the lowest ones you can handle, right? Compared to these bigger ones. But then if you're putting it up to that high rate so that you can handle a lot of data, you're causing latency to the sound. So that's when you're singing the vocal and it's coming back through the system like half a second late. And it'll mess up every recording that you've ever made, right? And that's why they created direct monitoring systems inside of audio interfaces so that you can tune that feature and still hear, you're actually hearing the analog signal without going through the computer and back out again before it hits the converters and everything. So you're actually getting the real signal still right to your headphone through the interface, right? And that allows you to record on time no matter what setting you have here. But if you're setting it to this red small size sample buffer, right? It's maybe not capturing everything properly depending on the speed of your system, right? Even though you're hearing it on time and everything, you're going to get this dirty audio into Pro Tools or into Reaper or whatever you're using, Studio One, FL Studio. It doesn't matter which one you're using. The same principles apply here, okay? And this is all going into how you set up your system for audio recording, right? You have to have everything just in the right spot. So if I'm recording a vocal, I'm going to put this down to 128 right here because that's the highest my system can handle. It has the least amount of latency, but it doesn't cause errors. The box isn't too small here that it's going to cause clicks and things on the other end, right? Whereas when I'm doing mixing, for example, and I want the computer to have as much capability as I can to put many plugins on, things like that, right? I'm going to crank that sucker up. This one actually goes to 2048, which is double most interfaces, but my computer can't handle it. The interface can do it, but the computer can't handle it, right? So I set mine to 1024 and it gives me a lot of horsepower to add plugins. But then you'll notice when you hit play on the session when you're at those speeds, you'll actually wait for about a second because that's the delay time, that latency that's happening for those 1024, right? And it's actually, you don't notice it so badly if you're not recording. You have a lot more horsepower, but you're going to hit go on the session and then wait a split second before you actually hear audio because it needs to process that first packet, right? So it helps different situations. You got to have your buffer setting as low as possible for recording and as high as possible for mixing and doing intensive tasks like that, right? Editing stuff. It's just to get that high fidelity system throughout as you work on audio, you got to have these settings right. Okay. Do I need to cover anything else? Yeah, so if you see right here, ADAT, right? Optical SPDIF. So that's literally that other picture that I showed you here before. These guys, right? It's another version of this, but it's only sent. I think they have different specs. So if you're, it depends on your sample rate. Okay. So if you're at 44,100 samples as your sample rate, I believe my interface can do 8 channels of audio at a time through that light pipe connection, right? Whereas if I go up to 48 or 96 kilohertz, something like that, now all of a sudden I can only do 4 channels because the amount of data that you have to collect in a sample rate, it only has a certain amount of power in the interface, right? So it's smart enough to know, oh, I can't do 8 channels, man. That'll just mess up. I can only do 4. And like the programmers and guys that the designers that make these things, they all know this data inherently, right? It's like mathematician type shit. So be aware of that. If like the way you connect things matters for everything you're doing, okay? And then when it gets to the, you probably heard that they have new USB 3 interfaces, stuff like that. It's the kind of thing where like, do you need to get lower in latency? So like the Slate VRS system, it was only out for about a year. And it has the same, almost the same type of connection as Pro Tools HDX. And it's a totally different case. I wonder if I could just find one. Let me see if I can just bring one up here. Do I need a cable? What the fuck? What the hell's it called again? Here we are. Digilink connectors. That's what it is. Digilink. I'll show you that real quick. So we have these guys. Is that the one? No, that's an old school one. They have newer standards of them here now. Maybe I can just show you this back of like an audio interface. Show me this guy. I want to see the back. Can we see it on here? Where is that picture? This guy? Maybe I can. Oh, I just want to bring the one tab. There we go. Yeah, so if I zoom in on this, it only gets a certain size, eh? Down here, actually. PHDIO, primary and primary 2 expansion, right? And it's a different type of connection right here. And what that does is inside the computer, I'm trying to draw it for you here. This is a topology of inside the motherboard of a computer right here, okay? So you might have, you have your central processing unit here, okay? you have your couple lanes of RAM, right? There's your RAM. I can't type or draw worth of shit. This is why I'm an artist musically and not a visual artist. Get all my graphics done by somebody else. Okay, so then we have over here PCI Express. Okay, we have PCI-E. There we go. It's an E, kind of. And then we have it's interesting because you have the CPU, right? There's CPU. And then you have like a north bridge up this way. I'm not going to type all that out right now. A south bridge down this way. I'll just put SB, right? South bridge. And then a USB hub down here. Man, this is bad. Just a mockery of freaking the USB. There we go. And so usually you're plugging an interface in right here, right? Firewire's also down here. If I want to put Firewire over here, okay? Firewire. And then usually, I believe, is storage off to here. I might be, some computer person, correct me if I'm wrong, but hard drives. Okay? So the flow of audio, I'm going to do it in red right here. You have audio coming in right here. In order for it to get processed, it has to go up through here, in through here, back out through here, and then out to your stuff, okay? Outputs. So that would be up here would be your studio monitors, your audio interface outputs, things like that, right? The other design where you have the Digilink connector, if I can bring that up again, these types of connections, they have a special card in the back of the computer, and it's the same type of connection as a graphics card, which in order to have a high performing graphics card, you have to have fast speed, right? They actually like the standards for RAM and things are higher on those than actually like CPUs and things like that. RAM doesn't even go as fast as those. But here's where they connect, right here. So you can see obviously the path is a lot shorter along here. This is the long way to get into the swing of things. This is where we're bringing in audio for professional devices, okay? And so the amount of like time or latency inside the computer, the ability for the CPU right here to process everything is much faster coming in right here, right? Because it doesn't have to go through all these things. And these are made by different companies, the USB root hubs inside the motherboard, right? All that kind of stuff. And so what's also happening, maybe if I draw it in green. So you go in with red, it goes to the CPU, it gets processed by RAM, back out, right? And then it gets stored to the hard drive. There you go, right? There's your green line right there. That's storing the data. And then when you want to take something off the hard drive, so you're playing back at this point, right? Instead of recording, it has to go in, get processed by the RAM and back out, right? And then off to your audio, like the outputs of your audio interface. So there you have a little diagram of how this all works internally. So depending on what type of device you buy, so USB 3, I believe, is more of a situation where, again, computer people, correct me if I'm wrong, but I believe USB 3 goes direct, almost like PCIe. USB 3. There you go. Kind of like that. Okay? So then we're dealing with like the specs changing, the placement inside a computer changing, right? And it's just, this is going to determine how high fidelity your audio can be, essentially, right? Just interesting things to note. There you go. But yeah, that's about it for today. I hope it's been helpful. I hope everything, you just go back and watch it again and again until it makes sense to you. If it doesn't, if you have any questions, feel free to hit me up on any of my social media channels. I'd love to explain it further if you need help or whatever. But yeah, we're just trying to get you guys to have the highest quality recordings. Here's the whole point. You've heard your things about Hollywood going under, all this stuff. We've experienced it over the past 5 years, right? So now comes the time where we need to equip ourselves with the highest end. We need to be able to do the Hollywood's job from our homes. That's the key here, right? And as technology progresses and helps us do that, I don't think AI has such a hand in doing a lot of this kind of stuff where it's more theory based, right? And it's more just understanding more for yourself so that you're going to do a better job like they do. Because they already all understand this stuff, right? That's why they get paid so much in Hollywood to do this stuff. And I see a time, I was talking about this with you, right, Julia? Where like bigger clients and stuff are not going to be able to get the service they used to at those bigger studios and things. Because, I mean, even my mastering engineer down in London, the investment that he had to make to put that console in and stuff, right? Like they bought the console, they had to pay the console off, all this stuff. That's what causes the rates that are for mixing at a big studio and the rates for recording, stuff like that, right? When you've only spent $20,000 on an entire room like this, you don't have to pay off as much in order to make the money, right? You know what I mean? So it's kind of like we need to equip ourselves with all of this type of knowledge so that we buy devices and we do our jobs in such a way that we're getting the same quality as them with like a tenth of the cost, right? So it's like anarchy to audio in a way, you know. So I believe that's why I was put here, is to teach you guys to figure all this stuff out on a technical level, so you don't need to worry about all the expensive stuff that used to be, you know. And it's only gonna get better from here as we progress through. You know, I feel like we've kind of hit a limit a little bit with the ability to record, where it's like we went from recording on wax originally, right, on the little tubes, the phono tubes, dude, doing tapes with magnetism because it can handle the higher frequencies, right, to digital on computer where we can now do crazy things with editing, high sample rates, and all that stuff. Do you think there's going to be another one next? I don't know, really. It's almost like HD TVs. Do we really need 8K TVs, right? Can your eyes see a difference? I saw a funny post the other day. It was like, I've had a 4K monitor for like 6 months now, and guys, I don't think I noticed the difference between the old one that which is like 1080p or whatever, right? So it gets to the point where it's like, do we really need to go further with this, or has like technology kind of cruxed at this point? It's kind of where it will ever be, right? But yeah, otherwise, have a great afternoon. We're gonna jump into the next series, like I said, probably in 3 weeks or so, and we'll get into the idea of, I believe, well, it's called the idea stage, actually, of making a song. Now that we've got this kind of technical BS, I call it, cleared up, it's not BS, it's important stuff, right? It's just a headache for a lot of artists that are getting into recording, right? So to get this out of the way so that when we go to put an idea down, we just do it the right way, right? But yeah, next time we're gonna jump into the idea stage of creating a song. So even before you write lyrics, the idea stage will encompass kind of why do we write the song that we write? Where is the idea coming from? Is it an experience? Is it a trauma? Is it and what does that mean to the world? How do we position that? Or why are we writing the song in the first place, right? Are we writing it to try and get rich and be famous? Are we writing it to tell a story? Are we writing it as a means of therapy? Like a lot of musicians will say that, that their music is not for consumption. It's literally them in a place getting something out of their body, their mind, right? So we're going to explore all that on the next episode. Tune in for that. Otherwise, have a great Sunday afternoon.